Welcome back, everybody. I think we can start because most people are in, just the last two, last three. Welcome back. We're going to be speaking for half an hour or so. Again, we're definitely going to allow time for questions because they're fantastic. If you were here this morning, which most of you were, you'll already have heard Antony P. Bossis. I'm delighted to say that he was saving all the very best bits to this afternoon, to my session. It's part two, but the better part. Antony, as you know, is from the Department of Psychiatry at the NYU School of Medicine, and also, interestingly, from the Department of Classics and Religious Studies at the University of Ottawa. So I suspect we're going to get some science and some spirituality, possibly.
Who knows?
Antony, over to you.
Great, thank you. Good to see you again. I know it's a long, hot day, so I'm grateful. We're all grateful you're staying around. It's hot, but it's good to be here together. We have a little more time together. We divided my talk in two for a variety of reasons regarding logistics, but it allows me and hopefully us to slow it down a little bit. Can you hear me? Yeah. To slow it down, and we could talk. I'm going to talk a little more about the psychedelics, the end-of-life and cancer trials we've been doing, and then talk about a new trial we're about to publish, which is really interesting, where we gave a high dose of psilocybin to religious leaders to have them have the experience, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So to recap a little bit, psychedelics in America, as you all know, is becoming quite a healthy discipline of its own. And there are many, many indications for it, clinical indications. But I have to say, I think most of us would agree with this. The indication for end-of-life suffering has been the most successful in terms of the results we're seeing. And I think that's because the experience itself, when someone takes psilocybin under right conditions, and we're going to talk about safety today, even a young, healthy person, more often than not, these medicines open up consciousness into a landscape that typically involves existential themes. Who am I? What am I doing here? These very significant, transcendent, transpersonal themes that could be existentially and spiritually oriented. So that makes them a perfect match for an existential intention. Someone at the end of life is struggling with meaning and existential issues or spiritual issues. That's not too loud? No? Okay. And that's why they've been so powerful. And they've really been very powerful. And I'm going to read you a little more another person's response today. So it's great being here. And two people approached me already and said they're from Limnos. So any more Limnians here? We have two. Okay, two's enough. Okay. Okay. So we'll talk a little more about this mystical experience. So, a person asked me this morning about well, you're not priests. We're not priests. But we noticed since the 1950s, since the early days of the research, that the experiences reported were very much like the mystical or peak or numinous experiences seen throughout the arc of history that we see in the mystic core of all the great religions and traditions. And out of that, some well-known scholars in the 1950s gleaned the scale we use called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire that you heard about this morning. And Abraham Maslow was a very, very famous American psychologist. I'm sure many of you know of him. And one of his brilliant contributions was talking about what he called the peak experience, the same experience. And again, that they're naturally occurring. Humans are wired for meaning. I believe it's our essence. I believe it's who we are. And for some reason, beyond my understanding, we're separate from this connection so often in our lives. But through proper techniques or practice or life itself, and now we know what these medicines, if they're done in a safe setting, can reliably generate that experience at times. And Maslow said, to the extent that all mystical or peak experiences are the same in their essence, and have always been the same, all religions are the same in their essence. And what he means by this, he says in the next sentence, there's something common as this transcendent experience. He's not saying all religions are the same. They're all different and they're all beautiful. But that they all attempt to transcend and reach out to something ineffable, something beyond language, something beyond ordinary material world. And in that sense, there's this common ground, what Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy. And so in some ways, these experiences have contributed to that. So in the early days, there was a lot of writings about all of this. And we're really, it's been touching for all the researchers in this to see these experiences correlated with better deaths for so many people. So this first came to awareness in 1962, a very famous study called the Good Friday experiment. It was done on Good Friday. It was Catholic Good Friday. And they gave psilocybin to 10 theology students and the placebo to 10 others. And the person who did it was a man named Walter Pahnke. He was a psychiatrist and a divinity, he was a minister. And he started the cancer research, and he did this very famous study. And they found that 9 of the 10 participants had what looked like a complete mystical experience, just like the kind we've seen for ages. And that was striking. And ever since then, they developed the scale. In 2006, at Johns Hopkins, where Dr. Barrett is director of, they replicated that study and again found in healthy volunteers that 61%, I can't see it all on the data, but had this mystical experience versus placebo. So we've shown that under good conditions, and we'll talk about how we do this, and Fred did already today, people can have this experience. So healthy people can have it in these studies, and that's very enriching. But people who are dying can have it, and it's been shown to promote a greater acceptance and meaning and gratitude around death. You know, who knows Houston Smith? Anybody? A few people. He was a great American, not American, he was a global comparative religion scholar, very famous. He died at 103 years of age. He was in that trial. in 1962. He went on to become a very, very famous comparative religion professor and scholar. And he said that experience, although he was already a religious scholar, he said that experience showed him, whatever you want to call it, divinity, all that is, the uncreated energies, as the Orthodox call it, it really changed him. And he wrote, and I said this morning actually, I think, to somebody, a spiritual experience does not by itself make a spiritual life. The meaning behind that is psychedelics don't make somebody Mother Teresa. It's what you do with it. It's the values you get from the experience. Does it change your behaviors? Does it change who you are? If it was just an incredible day and 2 days later you're still, a cheat and a liar, then not much changed. And my hero, and many of us, is our hero, Aldous Huxley. So the great Aldous Huxley, as you all know, was a great literary writer. But he was very interested in comparative religion and the perennial philosophy, the common core of all religions. And Fred spoke this morning, in the 1950s, Humphrey Osmond gave him mescaline in Los Angeles. He had a very powerful experience. He wrote The Doors of Perception, which was about his experience. And he went on to promote the use of psychedelics for people who were dying. His first wife died of cancer, and it profoundly affected him. And he spent the rest of his life trying to help talk about how this experience can help people die better. I love this picture, by the way. So this is an actual picture of Aldous Huxley on his first mescaline trip in Los Angeles, California, in 1953, I guess. And I love this because, of course, it's a great historical picture, but only an English, literary, elegant author would come to his first psychedelic trip with a tweed jacket, cuffed pants. It was very classy. There was no psychedelic t-shirts. And a curious historical note, when he died, he had asked his second wife, Laura, to give him LSD as he was dying. Now, we don't do that in our studies. And he died while on an LSD experience. And his wife, Laura, writes about it beautifully in a book called This Timeless Moment. She read to him from what would become a book based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And it's a very poignant little book about his passing. But she says that after he finally died, she walked out into the living room of the home, and he was a major celebrity at this time. And there were a lot of people visiting her, helping her, supporting her. And she says she comes out, and they're all huddled around the TV set. And she thought, that's strange. Why would they be watching TV as Aldous is dying? And as she approaches them, she leans over their shoulders, and she sees on the TV that JFK was just assassinated in Dallas, Texas. So she wrote poignantly about how John Kennedy and Huxley shared kind of a vision for helping humanity, and of course they died at the same moment. And speaking of Huxley, Huxley wrote about one of his experiences. What came through the closed door was, in terms of the experiences, was the realization, not the knowledge, for this wasn't verbal or abstract, but the direct total awareness from the inside of love as the primary and fundamental cosmic fact. So this is the room where we do our studies. So our trials are done in like living room-like settings. I might have showed you this morning. It's a hospital, but it looks like a comfortable setting, and that's the point. Nice rugs, nice art on the walls. Fred spoke this morning. We prepare them for a few weeks, get to know them, develop trust and rapport. We do a very careful medical and psychiatric screening. And when they're ready to go, we spend weeks getting to know them and preparing them for the experience. I can't predict what will happen. Anything can happen. But I can help them cultivate a position, how to go into the experience. And what we tell them is to trust yourself. Trust consciousness, trust the medicine, trust us. And let go into the unfolding changes. Whatever comes up, move into it. And this is the big secret and tip. Whatever's arising, even if it's frightening, scary, even if it's death itself, you move into it. So if someone says, if I feel like I'm going to die, what should I do? And we would say, go ahead and die. Now, they're not going to die that day on the couch. But by moving into suffering, it always changes to a transformative, insightful teaching moment. Any of us have rarely seen that not become the case. If you run from it and get frightened, then you can have a panic attack. Then it's what we call a bad trip. But by like in a Vipassana meditation, you're moving into the unfolding changes in consciousness. Whatever's coming up is coming up for a reason, we would say. It's consciousness. It's your consciousness. It's here to teach you. So they go into it. We help them go into it with a curious attitude. Be curious. What's coming up? How can I learn from that? Something frightening, something lovely, whatever it is, you move into it. And it takes the full day. And then at the end of the day, we have weeks of integration and preparation. So those are the three phases. I'm going to run through that. Let me show you a few more data for any scientists here. So we talked about this morning some anxiety and depression scales and demoralization. So this is a scale called death transcendence, where the people report that the experience itself was more enduring than anything else they know, including death. And it transcended anything and everything. It's a profound implication. I can't read that over there, but 70% of the participants reported that the top 5 most or single most meaningful and spiritual experience of their lifetime. Up to 90% reported enhanced quality of life. So here we see personally meaningful experiences, the most important of their life, up to 70%. Spiritually significant, up to 100% almost. Positive behavior change. Spiritual well-being, existential well-being, up to 90%. These are profound numbers, and they're consistent across all those studies. And end-of-life and cancer palliative care studies are the most, right now, the most prominent results we're seeing in psychedelic research. So many people have passed away already, but we contacted the survivors 4.5 years later, and still, depression and anxiety, if you see here, at 4.5 years, see the 4.5 years, they were still decreased. And this is very important. Demoralization, that sense of loss of meaning, hopelessness, deep existential spiritual distress, profound suffering, was sustained at its improved level 4.5 years later, as was hopelessness. This isn't seen in other medications. And we're starting a new trial now where that's going to be the primary variable. We're doing a multi-center trial that I can talk about later. So this woman, I love this woman. She was, Dinah was a patient in our first cancer trial. And this is from the Washington Post. So some patients were okay with coming out and speaking about their experience. Dinah was one of the few people who didn't have advanced cancer. Most did. 1 or 2 had cancer in remission, but crippled by fear of a recurrence. And she couldn't function. She was home, gaining weight, not leaving the house, could not function, crippled with anxiety. She had a very powerful experience. When it began, she experienced a lot of turmoil. It was very difficult, very challenging. And she remembered we were there, and she reached out and said, I need help. This is dangerous. We held her hand, and we just were there. Go with it. Go with it. You're safe. Go with it. So we're going to talk about spirituality a little bit. She wrote in her journal that evening, and I want to read you just one sentence that's wonderful. So Dinah was an atheist. Now, she lives in Brooklyn, New York. So a Brooklyn, New York atheist is more of an atheist than other parts of the world. So when I travel to Boulder, Colorado, a Boulder, Colorado atheist is a little different. Because the Boulder, Colorado atheist, well, there's something going on. There's some energy. There's a life force. There's some of my chakras are alive. Brooklyn is like nothing's happening. And Dinah said, after that moment, she said, after a while, I began to feel love, all-encompassing love. And I felt that I was bathed in love. And really, I think the only way to express it in our language is to say you were bathed in God's love. Well, I'm an atheist, so bathed in God's love is not what I want to say, but that really expresses the feeling. Totally encompassed by love. And I kept that feeling the entire day and the next day, and I can still experience it today. She got cancer again 4 years later, and again did okay, and again this experience helped her get through it. Now, the Greek is always involved when I'm working in these studies. People always ask, what are these experiences like? Like lots of things. They could be autobiographical, they could be sensory, they could be profoundly spiritual. I like this word, katamalipi. How many people know katamalipi? Okay, half the audience. The other half should be ashamed of yourselves. So katamalipi is I believe, used during Easter week, and it's defined as joyful mourning or sweet sorrow, the combination of suffering but transcendence. And I love this word, and for me it speaks to the quality of these experiences because these experiences seem to have occurring at the same time a sense of unspeakable suffering and sorrow, but also unspeakable joy and promise, co-occurring naturally. And I think that's what happens every moment, including right now. And all of us right now, in the world right now, there's unspeakable suffering, but also unspeakable joy and love. And it seems these experiences help people cultivate an equanimity to travel, go forward with both of these. I mean, it's part of who we are. She had that experience, and it's very touching. But it's an interesting word, and to me, it speaks to what people talk about. That unless we don't really transcend suffering, people will tell us that we coexist with it. We accept it as part of the path. And if we do that, we can be with both suffering and non-suffering. So when the study was published, it was a big thing, front pages, and now that was in the early days. So for a few minutes, I want to discuss briefly a new study we're done with. We're going to publish it in a few weeks, maybe 2 months, where we gave this medicine to religious leaders. Now, why would we do that? Because if the experience is of a spiritual quality, or can be, why not bring in religious professionals from all different religions? Have them have the experience, 2 experiences. They got 2 for the price of 1, at a very high dose, and have them tell us about their experience. Does it affect their livelihood? Does it affect how they're a priest or a rabbi or an imam or a Buddhist teacher? How do they describe it? So it helps us describe the phenomenology of the research. Mystical experiences have been documented throughout the arc of human history by mystics, by saints, by everyday people. And as I said this morning, they happen under all kinds of techniques and practices. It's part of who we are, the Abrahamic religions, the Eastern religions, and it seems to be a core of human consciousness. And as Houston Smith said, it's about the values you take from it. So we began this study 10 years ago, boy oh boy, and we're finally done. We're going to publish it soon. I want to read to you one quote from one of the participants. We haven't published the results yet, so I can't say too much, but we presented a few preliminary results in Denver, Colorado this summer, and I'll talk about those briefly. But I love this quote by a rabbi in the trial. He said, "The experiences, because we have two, deepened and opened up my appreciation of other religions, as well as my own. And again, I'm coming not as a person who didn't have that background. I had the background of interfaith dialogue, but now it was like I lived the other religions. I embodied them. I was them. I saw them. And I realized that each religion has this incredible truth. All the truths are in all the religions to some degree. Some of them just highlight one facet more than the other. But the active ingredients are in all of them." So we're not out to change religion or anything. We're scientists. But could that promote interfaith dialogue? Could that promote acceptance and openness to each other, not just in religion? And some of the results that we did, let me take this off. So we can't give all the results out, but some preliminary stuff. So these different religious leaders said that the experiences were very within their theological beliefs, but also beyond those. Let me get to some other stuff here. At a year later, they said they were among the most spiritually significant and personally meaningful experience of their lifetime. During one of the sessions, they had a profound spiritual, sacred experience. Increased conviction and fulfillment of their traditions, openness to other religious pathways, and a greater sense of the divine. Albert Einstein, the great mystic, said, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." And one thing about suffering, okay, we're going to go back. And then we're going to close up. We've learned over and over again, who did it in these studies, by moving into suffering comes insight. I don't know why that is, but that is the design of consciousness. There is suffering, there is sorrow. We're not going to get out of that. But by accepting it, moving into it, we see over and over again a release from the suffering. It seems to be, it's a human fact now, by being with suffering, we can be liberated from suffering. And we see it over and over again. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says, "Nothing's faster than a teacher than suffering itself." Leonard Cohen, "Ring the bells that can still ring, forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And there's a great quote by Rumi. I'm going to put it here if it's still there. "The wound is the place where the light enters you." So, in summary, implications of psychedelics, we've talked about a lot this morning, improving how we die. It provides a method to study mystical experience in a laboratory setting, we could study this now in a closed setting. Pro-social ethical implications. Again, if we're all connected, literally connected, how do I hurt you? How do we kill one another? Addiction, PTSD, depression, eating disorders, a host of clinical applications. Are there implications for interreligious dialogue? For consciousness studies? Are we wired for meaning, and if so, why? And that's the question. Why would that be? Why would nature, or God, whatever you want to call it, but why would all of this wire us for these experiences. We have to have an answer for that. And what is this experience? Is it the ground of being? Is it the fabric of consciousness that our patients and the astronauts say? What, if anything, is enduring? And finally, I'm going to dedicate this talk to two great men. Albert Hofmann in 1938, by mistake or cosmic accident, discovered LSD. He co-wrote The Road to Eleusis with Gordon Wasson, who went to Mexico and brought back the mushrooms. So these two men, and I want to close with a quote from Albert Hofmann before he died in 2007. Alienation from nature and the loss of the experience of being part of the living creation is the greatest tragedy of our materialistic era. Therefore, I attribute absolute highest importance to consciousness change. I regard psychedelics as catalyzers for this. They are tools which are guiding our perception toward other deeper areas of our human existence, so that we again become aware of our spiritual essence. Psychedelic experiences in a safe setting can help our consciousness open up to the sensation of connection, of being one with nature. It is my great concern to separate psychedelics from the debates about drugs and drug wars, and to highlight the potential inherent in these medicines for self-awareness, for therapy, and for research into the human mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we do have a few minutes for questions. If you'd like to put your hands up, if you want to ask a question, we'll get a microphone to you. Just to say that coming up next, we've got James Bridle. It's brilliant that you ended with a quote about our alienation from nature, because James is going to be talking about ways of being beyond human intelligence.
James told me to do that.
Yeah, did he? He paid you 10 euros. So anybody want to ask any questions? Yeah, Alexandra. And if not, we'll go straight on to James, I think.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much. I would like to bring forward the conversation we had over the last days about the need to really set and setting, and the fact that society is moving on very quickly, and in a sense more quickly than science does. And you all reminded us that in the 50s, 50s and 60s, things went wrong, precisely because society took over this narrative and the capacity to believe that it would be sort of for our problems, and we must be very careful today not to repeat the same errors. So I would like you to comment on that for everybody.
I'm happy to underscore that again. Now, you might be surprised, because here I am, I dedicated my life to this. You would think, well, I'm very optimistic about the way America's going. I'm optimistic about the way the research is going and what these experiences can do for us, not the drugs, but the experiences. I'm not so optimistic about the way psychedelics are being unfolded in America, because they're unleashing them through state ballot initiatives, state by state, without the proper therapeutic frameworks, without the kind of silos or ways to hold these experiences, without the proper training, and I don't think that will go well. I don't think you can unleash these very powerful experiences that can be quite harrowing, quite dangerous in terms of the dark night of the soul, onto a culture that's ill-prepared, that's spiritually or psychologically immature in a rapid way. You know, in 1962, Aldous Huxley and Humphrey Osmond went to see Timothy Leary, and they begged him, slow down. Keep it to the researchers, keep it to and that sounds arrogant, so forgive me, keep it to the intellectuals, to the artists, to the jazz musicians, to the religious leaders. Let it slowly filter into the culture. Don't just throw it out there. And we had 7 years of some pretty good stuff, great music, but also some bad stuff happened. And in 1970, President Nixon shut it down. So there's lessons there. And the mystery schools, including Eleusis, were always kept secret, because they felt, maybe it's arrogant, you can't just unleash it onto the masses. Now, I'm a scientist. I don't make decisions about the masses and unleashing things. But we have to be careful and do it in a safe way. And so I think the rapid unfolding of a very powerful experience, some would say a spiritual experience, without the proper guardrails, teachings, guidelines how to do it, I'm not sure it's going to go so well. And I'm worried about where America is right now. Not with the research. We're doing great work here, and the government loves the findings. It's about doing these things, and also, forgive me, but the capitalism, making money on things. So you guys aren't there yet. Clap for anti-capitalism. You guys aren't there yet, but I hope soon you'll have psychedelic research starting small in trials. But I know it exists here in the underground. Just be careful, because things can go south, things can get shut down. These are powerful experiences.
Thank you. One more question here.
Okay, Anthony, I just right here, straight ahead under the camera. It's George. Hey, Anthony, I just love your presence here. I'm curious. It's beautiful to witness your life's work around how we approach the big death, and what you're about to unveil about the role of these medicines in preparing us for that. And I'm curious if there's any research, or how would you personally connect those dots to like how we move through all the daily little deaths that we encounter, like day to day, or in seasons of our lives, or loss of relationship, or loss of identity, and the big deaths and the little deaths are all connected. So how do we practice it daily as well?
That's a great question. So clearly, if these medicines at some point are given to people earlier in life, and they are, it does help with those little deaths too, right? With loss. I mean, it's great for loss. It's great for grief. You know, the pandemic, again, it unleashed a lot of things in our lives. And I think it made grief so much more palpable. Because grief is just, I think, in part the fabric of our interior. Even if there's nothing to grieve directly, it's just part of, I think, being human. And grief now in America is a very big issue in terms of the study of grief. And again, this allows us to be with those losses, the everyday losses, the impermanence. I mean, you know, the Buddhists speak about impermanence and non-attachment. And, you know, they help those experiences. We'll see where it goes. And someone asked me a question before. Where's Zaki? Is Zaki here? She had a great question. Did they help cancer in any way? They don't help cancer, the disease itself, but it'd be interesting. I think at some point we'll do this. If we gave these experiences to people early on in the trajectory of their cancer illness or some other illness, not at the very end when we're not going to change their disease. But there's a field called psychoneuroimmunology, which studies the interface of emotions and disease process. And we know there's a connection. It's called psychosomatic medicine. It doesn't mean fake medicine. Psychosomatic is real disease, but it's the interface. If someone has these experiences early on in life, in an illness, could it alter the trajectory of the disease? That would be fascinating. And again, so would meditation and mindfulness. So it's the experience, not the drug. But yeah, people who are younger and have these experiences do report coping better with the loss of everyday life. It ain't easy being alive, but it's the greatest gift we have.
Thank you. I think that is all we've got time for, I'm afraid, for your questions. Antony P. Bossis, thank you so much. All power to you and your work.